Join me on a day trip from Belfast to Carrickfergus, which is in the north of Ireland or Northern Ireland. Take your pick. If my accent does not give it away, I am originally from the United States, and Carrickfergus has an interesting connection to the US. The most popular tourist attraction in Carrickfergus is probably Carrickfergus Castle, but my first stop of the day was the Andrew Jackson Center. Of course, Andrew Jackson was the 7th president of the United States in the 1830s. Andrew Jackson was born in 1767 in South Carolina, but just 2 years prior to his birth, his parents had immigrated from none other than Carrickfergus. Unfortunately, the Andrew Jackson Center and Museum is not the original Jackson home, but it's my understanding that it's located in essentially the neighborhood where Andrew Jackson's parents would have lived. So this building is a replica, and it's intended to reflect what a typical 18th century Ulster-Scots cottage would have looked like. Andrew Jackson was actually one of 17 US presidents of Ulster-Scots descent, and the Ulster-Scots or Scots-Irish were among the largest immigrant groups to America in the 18th century. Andrew Jackson is a somewhat controversial figure in U.S. history. He's celebrated as a champion of the common man, but he's also infamous for his role in the Indian Removal Act and the Trail of Tears. This door actually opens, and I was told by the tour guide that that is where the children would have slept in this small cottage. Unfortunately, I did not get to see it, but the Andrew Jackson Center also has a small museum dedicated to the U.S. Rangers. The U.S. Rangers were founded in Carrickfergus in 1942 during World War II, and the small museum honors the U.S. military presence in Northern Ireland. Unlike in the United States, where Jackson's legacy is clouded by controversy, in Carrickfergus, the focus is more on his ancestry and his historical connections rather than his policies. Next up, I had to take the train just one stop down to see Carrickfergus Castle. But on my wee dander from the train stop to the castle, I wanted to get a feel for Carrickfergus itself. My day trip to Carrickfergus took place in December, and in the north of Ireland, sometimes the sun sets in December as early as 3:30 in the afternoon. Not only did I get a late start today and miss the first train I was supposed to take, but the tourist attractions in Carrickfergus close very early. And that probably has something to do with the fact that the sun also is currently setting very early. The Andrew Jackson Museum closed at 3, and I had to rush over to the Carrickfergus Castle because it is going to close at 4. So hopefully I can do a quick tour. Quite impressively, Carrickfergus Castle was founded in the year 1177 by John de Courcy, who was an Anglo-Norman knight who conquered much of Ireland's province of Ulster. The castle has been continuously used for military purposes from its construction in the 12th century until 1928, making it one of the longest serving fortifications in Ireland. My tour of the castle ended up being self-guided, and that's possibly because it was December and there weren't many tourists out and about, but it was nice because I could explore the place at my leisure. Over the centuries, Carrickfergus Castle changed hands multiple times. It was captured by the Scots in the year 1315, seized by the English in the 16th century, and even briefly taken by the French in 1760 during the 7 Years' War. During the Williamite War, the castle was held by Jacobite forces who were loyal to King James II until Williamite troops laid siege and forced their surrender. William of Orange himself landed in Carrickfergus shortly afterward on his way to the Battle of the Boyne. And I actually covered some of the history of the Battle of the Boyne and William of Orange in my video about the 11th and 12th of July celebrations that take place in Northern Ireland each year. Can we take just a second to appreciate this absolutely stunning rainbow? In the 18th and 19th centuries, Carrickfergus Castle was used as a military barracks and prison. Its thick walls and strategic position made it a stronghold for British troops stationed in Ireland. The castle has a collection of historic cannons, including several 18th century British and French artillery pieces. These were once used to defend against naval attacks. Carrickfergus actually has yet another tie to American history beyond Andrew Jackson. Believe it or not, Carrickfergus Castle was surrendered to the Americans in 1778. The castle played a role in the first U.S. naval victory when the USS Ranger attacked the British warship HMS Drake near Carrickfergus. The castle's garrison surrendered to the Americans, which marked an unusual moment in the castle's history. During World War I, the castle was used as an armory and munitions store. Then in World War II, it was repurposed as an air raid shelter and a military post. The castle is one of the best preserved Norman castles in Ireland, with its original gatehouse, stone walls, and keep still largely intact. The castle remains the most iconic landmark in Carrickfergus and is even featured on the town's coat of arms. It stands as a reminder of Northern Ireland's medieval and colonial past. Something that I found very interesting about Carrickfergus is that it was actually the main town in Ireland's province of Ulster for centuries before Belfast grew in importance. So I definitely never want to seem ungrateful for my travels, and I love history. I love learning about all sorts of history, but I'm not going to lie. After seeing Roman ruins, castles just seem a bit too modern for my taste. I actually love modern history, especially 20th century history, but when I took this day trip to Carrickfergus, I had just recently finished up 10 weeks in Bulgaria, and I was kind of still riding an ancient history high, so to speak. If I didn't already know that Carrickfergus is a predominantly Unionist town, some of the imagery outside of the castle would have made that very clear. The last thing I wanted to check out on this short day trip was the Carrickfergus Radar Tower, which was constructed as a radar training school for maritime navigation students in 1960. As radar technology advanced and training moved elsewhere, the tower became obsolete by the late 20th century and was fully abandoned by the 1990s, falling into disrepair. The tower has been recognized for its unique historical value, but it was placed on the Heritage at Risk register due to decades of neglect and vandalism. It's my understanding, though, that the tower is actually set to be restored and repurposed as part of a £40 million regeneration project that will focus on things like Carrickfergus Castle, the harbor, and surrounding historic sites. I mentioned that Carrickfergus is a predominantly Unionist town, and the town's pride in its British identity is something that is visible. Unfortunately, the town has also historically had a strong loyalist presence, including paramilitary groups like the Ulster Volunteer Force. By the time I grabbed a quick bite to eat, the sun had already set. It's hard to believe that this was filmed at about 5 in the evening. So, time to head back to Belfast.